Get started. We're busy morning this morning with an interesting topic. First of all, thank you all for joining on a Monday morning. First, people on the West Coast, I know it's first thing, and people on the East Coast, it's almost mid morning. So thank you. Um, I want to. My name is Raj Raghavan. I'm from Security Bricks. Joining me are some of the industry experts and also our own Joe Seaman, who's going to talk a little bit about our accelerator. So thank you, Carly and Richard from Microsoft. And they will introduce themselves as they get to their part, and we'll kind of talk through some of the challenges slash opportunities that we see within CMMC to help contractors go through. So we have a little presentation that kind of gives an overview of the agenda, talks about a little bit of the CMMC. Then Carly will take over, specifically talking about what Microsoft's how external service providers need to be in the boundary. What is the contractor's responsibility for having how to include or what artifacts to get, and then eventually Richard will talk a little bit more about getting to the details of those artifacts, and then Joe has an accelerator that Security Bricks has developed on the Azure Marketplace for CMMC for customers who are using GCC High to validate their implementation against CMMC controls. So just to give you a little bit who we are, Security Bricks is a company based here in the US. We are all US citizens. We live and work in the US. Our focus is security and compliance. We have two accreditations. We are a FedRAMP 3PAO. We're also a CMMC C3PAO. So kind of gives us a little bit insight into what these regulations are and how they fit in. We are a partner of SkillBridge. We have transitioned many veterans. In fact, today I think we have about 4 veterans working with us. Our people are transitioning, service members who are transitioning out. So we also have we are also a ServiceNow partner, which means we have accelerators for CMMC, FedRAMP on the ServiceNow store. One of them is focused on the third-party compliance or third-party vendors. So it's on the ServiceNow store. On Microsoft, we do work with the Microsoft team. We again, as I said, we have accelerators, and we will go a little more into that. Thanks to Carasoft, who is joining with us here. We work through them for all our contracts. So this is who we are. Then the next slides talk about the ecosystem, right? So this is a slide people have seen. How many contractors out there? How many need level 2 assessment from a third party? And how many of them may be eligible, of the level 2 may be eligible for self-assessment. So we find this to be interesting that CMMC is not new. It's been talked about for a few years, at least 5, 6, 7 years. It's gone through 2, 3 iterations. And right now, what's coming out is the proposed rules that came out in December 23 that really is going to talk about what the rules are. And a big part of that is how to include your external and cloud service providers. And our focus in this webinar is to really speak about that. The ecosystem, how do you put them in the boundary? What artifacts you need to expect? What is the expectation from a service provider to be part of that boundary? So this is more than just these contractors. It's also the people serving these contractors. So we thought we would focus on that because there's a lot of conversations we talk about saying, hey, I bought Microsoft, I have Microsoft Gov Cloud or GCC High. So what's shared responsibility? We have other tools we bought, we use other service providers. How do we make sure they're compliant? So I think this is something we thought we'll focus on that's bigger, that's part of this ecosystem. Then we can talk a little bit about the levels. As we talked earlier, there are 3 levels in CMMC, level 1, level 2, and level 3. Christine, next slide. Yeah. So level 1 are people who are foundation. These are majority of the contractors, the small ones that are still going to be able to continue to do self-assessment on 800.171. Level 2 is where right now there is a need for a third-party assessor. These are 3PAOs. They're about, I think C3PAOs are about 53 of them that are listed in the marketplace. That includes us. And we basically go in on right now, of course, we are doing a joint surveillance on to JSBA. You can, put your name there and the DIPCAC will work with the C3PO to get you a CMMC level 2 assessment. But if not, when it comes out, this is kind of where you get a third party 3PO to come in, and anyone who handles CUI data, and as part of level 2 need to go through. Level 3, it's still being defined. These are for the big guys, where DIPCAC itself will be involved in some of these assessments. Next slide. So there's been a lot of activity, right? I mean, you guys have seen December 23 was a big, in 23, I think just before Christmas, they came out with the proposed rules. They went for a comment period, came back. There's been, comments that are going on. But earlier I think last week on August 15th, they came out with the clause that goes into these contracts. These are basically, this is what the DoD has proposed to say how it's going to put these as in the clauses for like the DFARS and the FARS, and they're going to talk about how this is going to be mandated. So that just went out for a 60-day comment period. Everything that you read and see is that CMMC is on target to go sometime in Q1, Q2, maybe of 25, where they're going to, and then this is their timeline. So it's not going to be all in one, but they're going to kind of do a 6-month where they're going to start with revising the DFARS, which they have done some of it, but they're going to go through some self-assessments, start to talk about level 2 assessments and who needs to be. And then I think this is going to be more of a journey. So, and the goal is in 25 to 36 months, which is almost 2 to 3 years, they'll be able to have a full implementation. This is, you look at it, it goes, okay, I got 2-3 years, but still the amount of work, and we have a number of customers who are going through this journey, and it is a long tail pole. So it's not a small assessment. So yes, a lot of people have been doing 800, 171 assessments, dispersed scores, but this is a little more because now you have a third party coming to validate what you have, but it also has a few things, and the rules of the game are still being defined. So there are few experts on this. There's a lot of, the ecosystem is big. So I think these timelines are very helpful. And in my opinion, they're still a little aggressive because you have a lot of companies trying to get through this pipe, and they got to go through this because they have either RFPs they're bidding on, new contracts or contract renewals. So, and how do you get these service providers to be to get themselves certified within this time frame? So next slide. So I'm going to stop here and I'll let Carly take over. But just to talk about things that we see, boundary definition, which is basically CUI, what assets of CUI, what are the role of your security tools, the security protection assets. Then finally, what is the role of the cloud service providers, things like software like Microsoft and ServiceNow and Okta and DocuSign, things you have as cloud service providers, the software providers. And then, of course, the managed service providers, managed security service providers, people who take care of the desktop, people who take care of your security infrastructure. How do you put them in the boundary? How do you identify what your CUI boundary is? That's a little bit of a challenge. Then, of course, writing the SSP with the right responsibility. What is inherited, what is shared, what is owned? How do you do that? Of course, automation can help. That's the reason we went with ServiceNow and with Microsoft to release these accelerators to help a little bit. These are starting points because we still believe this is human are still needed. So it's automation with a human touch. So you can automate a few things and you still need human to validate it. And finally, what can be included in the POEM and what are the artifacts that are going to be audit ready? That's the key here, which is not just implementing, but the ability to show to a to a C3PAO, how do you implement, how do you meet the intent of that CMMC? Because CMMC is more than technical controls. It has everything how a CEO is handled, stored, transmitted. So it's more than just a bunch of data flows. So the question is, if you have a manufacturing floor, how are you handling CUI? So a lot of that is just that needs to go into these artifacts. So I'll stop here and I'll let Carly introduce herself and take it over, and then she can pass it to Richard and Joe. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Raj. Carly Salmon. I am a security technical specialist at Microsoft. I work in Microsoft Federal, working with our security stack and our customers who use that. So prior to coming to Microsoft, I was with DCMA DIBCAC. So started the program there that kind of has snowballed what the assessment methodology of the DFAR 7012 assessments and what was kind of the foundational for the CMMC assessments, assessing C3PAOs, being part of all of those conversations. So I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about like some of these updates. What does that mean? This body of evidence that they are now asking for, and what does that look like, and some of those things. So when we talk about CMMC, the rule, what's in scope, the boundary, as is on Raj's slide here, that is for you to determine where your CUI is living, what is operating within it. And so then you kind of get into these, what is a cloud service provider, what is a external service provider, a managed service provider, security service providers, excuse me. All of these acronyms that only CSPs were really part of the DFAR 7012 clause and those assessments, but now you're seeing with the new rule, with the rulemaking for CMMC 2.0, you're starting to see external service providers and managed service providers. And so I wanted to kind of provide what that definition is. When do you need to determine if they are within the scope of your assessment? I mean, it's still to be determined what this looks like. Again, it's going to kind of come out more with once the rules finalize and the supplemental clauses and the regulations that come with that will give more guidance. But your external service providers are people, technologies, facilities that you as an organization, contract owner, utilize for provision or management of your IT or cybersecurity services. And so they are doing that work on your behalf. And so if they are touching CUI, or now you're seeing security protection data is being brought into the conversation. What is security protection data? This is your log data, configuration data, things of that nature. So if they are interacting with CUI or security protection data as per the proposed rule, then they can be within scope. And so when you are choosing these providers, you want to ensure that they know what CMMC is and that they too are preparing to be assessed or have been assessed, which again is kind of muddled because right now, if they don't have a contract, they can't go through an assessment. So we'll start to see a lot of changes, I think, with that process as well. Your managed service providers, these are people who are going to be maintaining your day-to-day IT operations. The smaller your company is, the less resources you have internally. So it makes sense to outsource this type of requirement as far as for your day-to-day operations, or from a security service provider perspective, those providers who are using security tool management of your IT environment, monitoring, detecting, and responding, a lot of things that fall into that incident response category. So anything that your external service provider is interacting with is going to have to be considered for as an asset within that scope of work. And so that's where the responsibility matrix comes into play. Thank you for the next slide. This is really kind of the basic, if you will, of what your shared responsibility is. How much work are you doing versus how much work are you outsourcing? Or how much is your cloud service provider doing versus a managed service provider versus you? There is never zero responsibility on a company. And I think that's really important to highlight, because at a minimum, you are creating the kind of the left and right limits of your external service provider, or you are the one that's creating and turning on the policies. You are the one creating the access control groups, while a tool like Entra ID is going to do all of the technical pieces for it. You are the one that has to create and manage and review throughout your system's life cycle. So there's never zero responsibility on an OSC. Now, the more you outsource or the more you use of Microsoft products or you use of third-party products, the responsibility shifts, but it's never not on you. And then from a assessment preparation and an assessment execution standpoint, you need to ensure that you have all of the evidence that you need to provide to assessors or auditors for showing where their responsibility ends and your responsibility begins. And also you are kind of validating that they are meeting the requirements that you are asking them to adhere to. Because an external service provider, they will adhere to what they need to. And then if you tell them, you need to be CMMC level 2, then they'll provide that documentation. And then whatever they are doing with you, you have to make sure within that contract and that agreement with them that they are continuing to meet those requirements as they are interacting with your data. And so what does that evidence look like? So when we talk to a body of evidence, that's something that's kind of been really hot topic. It's contentious. Back in December, this memo came out about FedRAMP equivalency. So for the most part, it's been, excuse me, if you're going to use a cloud service provider or a product, either like as a government contractor, and you're going to have government information on your system, the tools and the products that you use that interact with that information must be FedRAMP authorized. And so there is a marketplace that you can go and see if a product or a company or a service is FedRAMP authorized. And then now it's a long and arduous process. Raj, I'm going to kind of just, pivot a little from what our plan is, but you're very familiar with this FedRAMP process, Raj. So can I ask you, how long does it typically take to go through that FedRAMP process?
Absolutely. Thanks. So quickly, yes, as a FedRAMP 3PO, we see this a lot. People, especially now, they're coming out and asking, hey, what do we need to do to make sure that we can be part of the boundary? So if you're not listed in the marketplace as a certified or in the marketplace as a authorized service provider, you then need to still go through this process, we had a couple recently we talked to, they told us probably a year to 18 months, depends on how ready they are with their artifacts and readiness process. But I would say this is a journey that's months, if not at least a little more than a year, because you need to go through the entire process, except you don't need a sponsorship. In this case, you can hire a 3PO, but you pretty much need to have all the artifacts, which includes the SSP, the SAP, the Security Assessment Plan, the Continuous Monitoring Plan. And then you do to get a 3PO, someone like us, to come in and independently validate. Because what you have to do as a CSP in this case, let's say you're not in the marketplace, and I want to be part of this CMMC ecosystem. What you have to do is not have have a third-party assessor for FedRAMP assess those. You then take those artifacts and provide it to the contractor, the OSC, the organization seeking certification. They still need to go in and take your artifacts, say that this is how we are using this cloud service provider. This is the related artifacts. Ultimately, it is the C3PO who then takes that information and says, yes, whatever the CSP has done in terms of their certification is how you have implemented it. And then they can accept or make changes to that. But the part here doesn't just end by you going through it, but also goes through to make sure that it is included in the contractor's assessment package to the C3PO. So it's a little bit of a chain, because we can kind of, one of the few companies we can wear both hats. So I can tell you what the FedRAMP can do, what the CMMC C3PO looks for. So yes, so Carly, if I answered your question, that's kind of what is the process. So you can now determine how ready you are in terms of timelines?
Yes. So thank you. Yeah. And that was a lot more than I was hoping for. So, but thank you for all of that. Yeah. So it's a months to years long process to get FedRAMP certified. And so they allow equivalency. So equivalency, like Raj was saying, is kind of that wiggle room for a cloud service provider or external service provider to show that they're meeting those requirements, even if they're not FedRAMP authorized yet. Like they could be in that process, and this package is to kind of cover them or cover you as an OSC while this cloud service provider is going through the process. Now, this memo came out basically that the DIBCAC is going to now be validating that you as a contractor have verified equivalency. And so the memo, which the QR codes that you're going to see on the next few slides, will link you to one of our blog posts that talks to equivalency, that talks to the Microsoft body of evidence, which I'll talk about in a minute, as well as a slew of links to Richard's blogs that go deep dive our packages and what it all means within FedRAMP, within CMMC, and equivalency. So essentially, this memo came out saying DIBCAC and or any C3PAO assessor is going to be validating that you have seen the body of evidence. And it outlines what is in that body of evidence as kind of put on this slide. And so we'll go to the next slide, which kind of gives you the definition of what these documents are. So if you're looking for the body of evidence, like these are the kinds of things that you are looking for from that cloud service provider or from that product, essentially, because there are products themselves that are in that are part of this FedRAMP process. And so you're looking for what is their implementation plan? Has it been validated by a C3PAO, like a FedRAMP authorized C3PAO, and different types of reports that fall into that validation verification of equivalency process, whether it's a penetration testing report, compliance attestation letters, or if there is a POEM, which interestingly enough, the FedRAMP equivalency memo requires that, or FedRAMP equivalency requires that a CSP or product or whomever be 100% implementation of the FedRAMP requirements. I mean, interestingly enough, to be FedRAMP authorized, you don't necessarily have to be 100% because your sponsoring agency will accept that risk. So there's like a dichotomy of requirements and implementation, but that's what they're asking for. So that's what we have to provide from an equivalency standpoint. And so this body of evidence that is being asked, now your DIBCAC assessors or your C3PAO assessors are asking for it. So if you are an OSC and you have an assessment scheduled, or you're about to go through one, or you're thinking about it, or whatever, if you don't have, or just in general, if you know that CMMC is going to apply to you, and there is a product or a CSP or an ESP, whatever that you're using that needs that authorization and they're not authorized in the marketplace, get that body of evidence now, because they're going to ask for it and they're not going to give like you need to show them by the end of the assessment, because it is there that you need to do this and that you've done this before you've even, like, you using a CSP is saying that you attest that they are FedRAMP authorized or that they are FedRAMP equivalent. So how do you do that without having the body of evidence? So that's why they're asking to see it. Next slide. So with that, the body of evidence is very highly sensitive information. And so it is not just out there on the interwebs, in the ether, for public consumption. There are, from a Microsoft standpoint, we have what we call the Service Trust Portal, and that is where you can find different documentation for regulatory assessments, our SSPs, different third-party assessments, etc., across many different, not just NIST, not just CMMC, but across like GDPR and everything else. So you can find most of that documentation on our Service Trust portal. But something like the body of evidence for CMMC, for our FedRAMP authorization package for our sovereign clouds and our GCC High, which is not authorized in the marketplace currently. So you will need your body of evidence if you are a GCC High customer. But in order to get all of that information, you have to request access. We need to validate that you are a customer and we can give you access to this. So it is put here on the slide who you can reach out to regarding GCC High or the Azure government packages. And then they will give you access. We have, because of this memo and because of, in a sense, what we've been dealing with as far as for our customers with their assessments, we have tried to make it simple for this CMMC assessment process. And there is a SharePoint site that you would then get access to that has everything kind of lined out nice and clean for you for that body of evidence. We are in this fight with you, I will say. We are, ensuring that we are meeting the requirements that DIBCAC needs for these things. And so just again, the biggest thing is if you haven't done it, do it now because they will ask for it and we'd rather you not be scrambling during the assessment where you can focus on actually the assessment than having to try and retrieve this package. With that, Richard, do you have anything else to add regarding the body of evidence or how Microsoft has set it up before I pass it over to you to continue the conversation?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that is unclear that I typically end up having to explain is that we've got two different bodies of evidence, right? We've got one that's for the Office 365 suite, and then we have one for Azure. The Office 365 is based on an agency ATO, meaning that we've already gone to multiple agencies that have authorized and accepted the risk of our body of evidence and ultimately have achieved ATOs. So for example, the Office 365 suite has been authorized by the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Department of Treasury. So it has been authorized, right? It's just not showing as authorized in the FedRAMP marketplace. However, if you look at the way that Azure is authorized, it's gone through and has an official provisional authorization. So it is truly authorized in the FedRAMP marketplace and contains most of the products other than purely the productivity suite. So if you look at, for example, Entra ID, or you look at the security suite like Defender for Endpoint, et cetera, those all fall underneath Azure, even though they're Microsoft 365. So it's important to know kind of which services are in each body of evidence, including O365 is just Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, right? Teams, which is incredibly important. But know that one of the things that they expect you as an OSC to do is to not only get the body of evidence, but inside of there is a control implementation summary. And that is written in the language of FedRAMP, which is NIST Special Publication 853. So all those controls are defined there according to 853. And in that particular document, a spreadsheet, is something called the Customer Responsibility Matrix, or the CRM. And as you even build your system security plan, it's your responsibility to go through that customer responsibility matrix and say which of the controls are purely Microsoft's responsibility or the cloud service provider. And if it's partial responsibility or full responsibility by the OSC, that should be documented in your system security plan. And the assessor should be looking for that, right?
Yes, no, that's a really great point, that where to identify the customer responsibility matrix, because the assessors definitely will. I mean, I've even had DIBCAC reach out and they're like, where's the CRM? And I was like, it's there, but they just don't know where to look. So we have, like I said, we have worked with DIBCAC to provide this body of evidence, provide all that information, and show them where within that body of evidence they can find the different things that they're looking for. But they are still going to ask you as an OSC, and it's on, unfortunately, or not necessarily unfortunately, but it is on you, and they are looking to you to do your due diligence. When like these requirements are not new, right? The DFAR 7012 clause is almost like 10 years old. It's the show me, the validation, the verification that has been over the past 5 years now. And so as it's been evolving, there are all these things that they are realizing that maybe, oh, that should have been part of it because, it wasn't put into practice previously. And so it's being put into practice now. But in regards to your external service providers, your cloud service providers, your managed service providers, security service providers, and many more managed services, you always just want to make sure, do they know what this is? Are they preparing for it? Because if still included in the rulemaking, they will, if for you to use them, you will have to validate that they have a CMMC level 2, if that is the equivalency, or if that's a certification you're going for, what your contracts require, that they have that certification. And that will be what is looked for when you go through assessment. So with that, Richard, what's autopilot?
Autopilot. So right around the time we started talking about this webinar, we had launched a campaign to let everyone know that finally, after years of folks asking, that we now have Copilot or Autopilot available within our government cloud. So that includes GCC and GCC High. And Autopilot's important because if you look at getting holistic compliant, the endpoint, meaning the PC, the mobile device, iOS, Android, anything that connects into your enclave where it would be able to access, store, process, transmit controlled unclassified information, or even ITAR data and EAR, that the endpoint needs to be managed by your organization and have a set of policies that really prohibit, in most cases, having a bring your own device strategy. So with Autopilot, it is now the ability to configure a machine that ultimately is managed by your organization and can conform to the compliance requirements naturally for NIST 800-171. So in the past, in order to do that, you had to do one of two things, right? You either had to, take possession of the device, like a new laptop, right? You would have to build out an entire image and deploy it to that endpoint in terms of being able to configure it to the organization's strategy for securing that endpoint. And then you would go and have the user sign into it. So you'd have to deliver the device to the end user, and oftentimes that user would be a local user, not a local user, but a standard user, right? Not an administrative user. And this is a very heavy, expensive process because you would have to, re-image the machine. You need to have the IT department take possession of it before they could actually give it to the end user. And especially since now so many of the end users are not in a physical location where the IT department resides, it's a pretty administrative burden. The second way is to, have a way to enroll your device in Intune, and it's a pretty, particular process in order to get your device registered on Intune. Typically, having to sign into your network, et cetera, and do an Azure AD join or Entra ID join, and install like the company portal onto the device. And it's a very user-driven process. It's prone to failure quite frequently, is what most of our customers have had to do, over the last few years. So now with Autopilot, you have the ability to have a device that would come directly from your supply chain, whether it's like Microsoft with a Surface or Dell or HP, etc., and they'll ship the device directly to the end user. And as the end user is enrolling or goes to sign into the device, it'll do an autopilot enrollment based on the configuration that the organization has defined. And it's a very user-friendly process, and it's governed by, for example, a set of elevated credentials that are managed by autopilot as opposed to the end user, so they can set up the whole PC in a streamlined fashion. And whenever the user finally gets signed into the desktop, they would only be a standard user, not an administrative user. Of course, that's a configuration requirement for CMMC compliance. So yeah, it's very well received. I'd say the one gotcha that I'll be transparent about is it only supports native join with Entra ID, meaning that it would be only joined to the cloud, as opposed to having a hybrid join where it be also authenticating to a local Active Directory domain services or traditional Windows Server based Active Directory. But most of my customers are moving in that direction of doing a native join to the cloud as opposed to a hybrid join, especially as applications are front-ended by Entra ID and various other federation capabilities to inject multi-factor authentication and whatnot, conditional access policies, that they are moving in that direction regardless. But now you get into a scenario where the IT department's really mostly concerned around, having to do management of the device, like with break fix and so forth. But I'll go. I know we're a little bit short on time, so I'll go ahead and let you go forward. But at the end of the day, it is available for GC High and Intune.
Hey, thanks, Richard. Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Seaman. I'm with Security Bricks, and I lead the Microsoft practice for the security space. So we covered a lot of good information today, and hopefully you found it informative. And one of the things that we wanted to touch on a little bit here is the efforts, as well as the sort of the controls that are in place, not only for CMMC, but also where that fits into zero trust. And so a lot of times, when we look at sort of the compliance, whether that's GDPR or CMMC or NIST 853, et cetera, we kind of look at those as sort of their own unique kind of silo. But really, when you look at it in a broader perspective, it touches all, there's a lot of commonality across these different compliance and regulations. And so when we look at zero trust, there's a number of organizations that they're starting to look at that journey. And like anything, CMMC and zero trust are both a journey. And so what we look at is the sort of the overlap around those. So as an example, when we look at access control, there's the mandates are significant around the access control, defining the role, the responsibilities, kind of the privileges, et cetera, associated to that. And for both of them, they try to identify unauthorized access, and so that's where we get sort of those combination and leveraging across those two different scenarios that allow you to kind of meet those requirements in both of those journeys. Another one within there, identity and authentication. Obviously, big push around MFA and trying to identify the user and authenticate that user at all facets and all segments within your environment. Both of those are common themes across CMMC and zero trust. Continuous monitoring, another one. That's where you start looking at is saying, yes, we need to be able to understand what security events are happening and being able to detect and respond to those events. Well, zero trust assumes breach, and so that requires that continuous monitoring of network traffic, user behavior, system health, et cetera, to identify any of those particular threats or events that are occurring. And like anything, it's more than just being able to detect them; it's being able to respond to those. Obviously, if you, the common theme is, if you have an event and it occurs, but nobody's looking at it, then, what exactly is the value around that? There's not much. So that's where it requires that full life cycle within that. It's understanding what are those events are happening and what is our response to those, whether that's automation, whether that's manual. Obviously the whole goal there is to try and reduce that time to detection and response. The other two in there, data security and network segmentation. Obviously, a lot of questions we get around data security is, what is CUI? What is in scope? And we'll touch on this in the next slide there. But the common theme that we see is, hey, I went out, I got GCC or GCC high, and I'm thinking that I've got everything I need to be successful for meeting CMMC compliance. Well, it's more than that, right? And so once you start, peeling apart the onion layers, then you start realizing, saying, hey, I've got more skin in this game. I just can't go out and buy my way to CMMC. I've got to do things. I've got to be able to configure things. And part of that is understanding where my data is. Where is my CUI? Where does that exist? Whether that's within Azure, within SharePoint, within Teams, et cetera. All those different ecosystems, as well as any other third-party system, right? So that's the sort of the common theme around that is understanding where that data is, but also that I'm encrypting that data. And that's where the zero trust comes into play of, encrypting it at rest and in transit, so that even if there is a breach, the data is encrypted, so it's not, readily available and visible to whatever that potential breach is. And then the other part is the network segmentation. This goes down into microsegmentation and things of that nature, and that's kind of putting in the appropriate controls, not only for to limit the spread of things like malware or restricting sensitive information going in and out of the various network segments, internally, externally, sort of your ingress, egress points. But also when you look at zero trust, it's trying to limit that lateral movement, right? And so that's where a lot of these things that are tied within CMMC kind of gets you set up pretty nicely in that zero trust journey that you can sort of re-leverage and have those both complement each other. Okay, go to the next slide. And what we've done with Security Bricks is we develop a CMMC accelerator. Basically, what this does is this leverages Azure Sentinel. It relies upon Azure policy using the NIST 800-171 policy, managing that through Defender for Cloud. And a lot of our reporting and analysis is leveraged through the Sentinel workbook using Azure Resource Graph. And so the really cool thing about the tool is it allows you to get a quick snapshot. And this is whether it's a security compliance group, whether it's your IT group, whether it's your audit group, et cetera. They have the capability to see this tool and understand what the status is around those various controls. So it goes through the full 110 controls. It gives you the details around each of those controls. It provides some really nice executive level reporting so that you can show where you are, what's remaining, what's left. And the really nice thing about it is it allows you to understand what is my responsibility? What do I have to do in order to meet that? There are a lot of things that are within CMMC compliance that don't sit in the Azure ecosystem or in the M365 ecosystem. Things like user training and things of that nature. Obviously, your SSP and things, there's documentation, there's processes that aren't necessarily integrated into the Azure system. What this tool allows you to do is to not only provide links to and reference points to those various repositories, but also allows you to manage those and assign ownership and put it some time constraints as far as when these are going to be done. The other really nice thing about the tool is that it also allows you to see, well, how do I fix this, right? So now I've got something that may not be in compliance. It's generating a failure alert. Well, that's great, but how do I fix it? What do I need to do? And that's where the tool allows you to go through that and really go through the details of what it's going to take for you to complete the CMMC compliance, whether that's a configuration change, whether that's a service, etc. So really some nice features around that. And the beauty of that tool is that it works not only in the government space for GCC, GCC High, but also we have a separate tool that works in the commercial space. So whether you're just dealing with a commercial version and you want to be able to understand where your CMMC compliance is, this tool will allow you to get that understanding in a much faster fashion than if you had to go through and manually do those one by one and try and understand what controls apply to what CMMC control based on the Azure services.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you everyone who stayed. Thank you so much. I am Christine. I'm the Principal Evangelist for Security Bricks, and I just want to reiterate, if you want to see a full demo of the accelerator, just email info@securitybricks.io, and we do have also demo videos available if you want to watch it as well. And then also, there was a couple questions in chat. So the first one was, do we need to certify any SharePoint Online developed application, or how can we it under Microsoft umbrella, or how do we do it under, I think, how can we do it under the Microsoft umbrella? I think this goes for either Carly or Richard.
I think that it really is dependent. If it's just a SharePoint app that you're consuming internally within your organization, that would fall underneath NIST 800-171, your CMMC Level 2 certification. Really, the only time that you start to get into a scenario where you need, for example, a FedRAMP authorization is if you are store processing or transmitting CUI on behalf of another organization. So that would be a definition of a cloud service provider, right? Like Microsoft or Amazon or Google, et cetera. And now if you package up your product and make it into a SharePoint app and make it into a multi-tenant solution where you've got multiple separate customers that are signing into your system and they're using it, now you're in a scenario where they, as a OSC themselves, may need to go through the process of getting, for example, a CMMC Level 2 certification, and it may be construed that you now become a cloud service provider, even though you're running your software on top of SharePoint Online or on top of Azure, for example.
Awesome, thank you. And then there's another question from Matt. He wants to clarify, it's only for Autopilot version 2. I'm assuming there's the deployment versions. Is it version 2, just for clarification?
Yes, it's the most recent.
Okay, awesome. Well,
actually, Richard, I have a question that normally comes. I have a couple of questions. Since, do you have any more questions, Christine? If not, I wanted to.
There's one more.
Sure, go for it.
From Abdallah, how does your accelerator compare to ExoStar and Future Feeds tools? So Joe, I think that's a question for your or Raj.
Yeah. So we have actually Future Feed. We have not much idea. There are tools that help you with content. This is one that just runs on Microsoft Sentinel. This is not a tool that provides policy content or tools like ServiceNow will enable you to where you can store your artifacts and run through assessments. Here we are simply, it's a technical tool that runs scripts to go and look at your Sentinel implementation or a Microsoft Azure implementation. So I'm not familiar with the other companies, so I can't comment, but yeah. So I have a couple of things I wanted to quickly ask Richard and Carly. Since we have a few more minutes, we always get asked. So typical things that come up are, are there tools, are there things that, most of the, 80-90% of the ecosystem that uses, that's going to be part of this journey is going to have Office 365. It's going to have Microsoft products. It's going to have, and they, and other related, software. So, how are there anything that you can, as part of AI Copilot, anything that you have seen that can help identify CUI? Is my entire email part of this boundary? Is my entire SharePoint part of this boundary? How is there something I can identify to say how? Any thoughts? That's one question. I have a couple others that are typically that come to us.
So was the question, is there anything in the ecosystem that can help protect
Yeah,
CUI?
anything from Microsoft that can help, these people, use it to either identify it, or how do you even include, you can't have the entire corporate SharePoint. So do you need to have a separate one for CUI or non-CUI, and any guidance so people go through?
We've got this great product called Microsoft Purview. So using something like Microsoft Purview and can help you identify the data and the sensitive information in your system. It can help you apply labels and protections like access control, encryptions across your entire M365 ecosystem. So right now, what's available in GCC High is the M365 Microsoft Purview. And so that'll allow you to be able to also put specific DLP policies or insider risk management type policies. Really goes beyond the CMMC requirements, but from security as a whole. But Microsoft Purview can help you with labeling and protecting, and then also being able to, in a sense, also create reporting as far as like your how much CUI is in your ecosystem, where in your ecosystem it is, whether it's Teams, Exchange, SharePoint, and like what specific sites. But really, a lot of that does come down to rights management and access control for protecting it. And you can do that within the M365 tools. Richard, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think the key is that there's ways that you can be prescriptive and I'd say proactively go out and scan all the content, whether it's unstructured file storage, et cetera, that resides across SharePoint or OneDrive for Business or even file stores, and be able to identify CUI. Of course, it's really helpful if the headers and footers are there, right? And the result would be to apply the purview that Carly was mentioning. I would say from a future look, there are a number of, I'd say, early but skunkwork projects that are leveraging Azure OpenAI as a generative AI solution to go out there and say, here's something that looks like CUI, right? Scan this and then go and compare that across the database, or unstructured file storage to be able to also detect that. But your last line of defense is always going to be the human being, right? So.
Yeah, okay. No, and Richard, you took the next words out of my mouth. I was going to say the other thing that I know I've been trying to figure out is how can we use AOAI to be able to scan the enterprise to help with that identification. And that's when you can then apply your purview labels, rights management, etc. to it.
Right. So we have one question that said, do you have our security bricks accelerator on GCC High? Yes. What we as Joe mentioned, we do have it on GCC High, and also the commercial. So another question that comes to us, and Richard, would love, you've been on this journey for a long time. This is the world you're going to live in. You're going to have an exciting time. You did a placemat. So what are you seeing from or what suggestions would you give? You've been through the CMMC journey, as far as I know, from the beginning. I'm very impressed that you have gone through and you developed the first placemat for Microsoft. You have done some of these. So what suggestions or guidance you would give? And what are you seeing now in the market, that how small, I would say mid to large, right? Just take mid to large. And how are they working, and how are you engaging? Anything that you can provide guidance, because you have a blog. Love to hear a little bit, and I think people missed your intro too, so it'll be nice to get that. Oh, good. All right. Yeah, Richard Wakeman, a chief architect for aerospace and defense here at Microsoft. So I play a role horizontally, goes across many of the business units at Microsoft that have defense industrial base, FFRDCs, UARCs, et cetera, to be able to provide government cloud expertise and to align with CMMC and other regulations that are
unique to the defense market or even critical infrastructure. So yeah, whenever CMMC was first announced back in 2019, we began a number of projects across Microsoft to look at how to accelerate the path to compliance, both by fine-tuning our product offerings, but also having a set of tools that are available to our customers to be able to, look at, for example, what capabilities of the Microsoft platform can be able to help you demonstrate compliance with CMMC, and especially level 2. I will say that the product of that was looking at taking the customer responsibility matrix, which was written in 853, crosswalking it to 800-171, which would be the requirements of our customer, and then mapping each one of our products, whether it's Entra ID or privilege identity management or conditional access policies, Intune for device management, Defender for endpoint for our endpoint detection response solution, and saying that you can not only look at what you get to inherit from Microsoft, but you also have the ability to look at how Microsoft's products and capabilities can be configured and adopted by your organization to satisfy all the controls of CMMC. The result of that was a CMMC product placemat, and I'm happy to announce that we've got a new private preview version of it that is available. And for anybody who wants to get a view of it, happy to provide that and solicit your feedback, of course, being part of a private preview. Otherwise, the previous version, still very useful, is available out on our download website. We can provide some links to. The one thing I'll say is the new enhancements, of course, all the product renames that we've had over the last couple of years, but also looking at more clarity that's come out as the release of CMMC has been finalized in the rulemaking process, as well as incorporating in the CMMC level 3. So we've got levels 1 through 3. It's paired with the technical reference guide, which is more of a written format as opposed to the product placemat, which is a interactive spreadsheet. So yeah, we're super excited about getting that released. Of course, feedback is going to be paramount, and that's true for both our partners and our customers like OSCs.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank
Christine?
you. Yeah, so Josh, we will answer a question. We're out of time. I think we went over almost half an hour, 30 minutes over, which we started late, so that's an excuse that I'm gonna, put out there. Thank you again, everyone, for staying, and thank you for the speakers. Thank you to everyone. Just to note, we will be having a Zero Trust webinar in September with some more subject experts from Microsoft. And her name's Lily. She's a director over there of technical around Zero Trust. So just mark your calendars that it's going to be in September. And then if you have any questions, again, the QR code goes to the Azure Marketplace and talks a little bit more about our accelerator. So if you had questions about that, please check that out. Other than that, have a great rest of the work week. And I hope to hear all from you later.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.